Hey friends, it's Adrian Jensen for ProductionCrate.com. Rotoscoping is no fun, so today I'm going to show you how to avoid it on some shots anyway. But first I need to talk a little bit. On the screen you see several examples of adorable animals with explosions composited in behind them, because of course you do. In all these examples I did not roto a single frame, not one frame. However, I did make heavy use of Red Giant's keying suite, specifically the effects Matte Feather and Alpha Cleaner, which can be found in the Key Correct section. Alpha Cleaner is magic. You might also benefit from having Real Smart Motion Blur installed, but you can get by without it. This also is not going to be a step-by-step tutorial with a single end result, which is why there are so many examples, because each and every shot is going to be a little bit different. Also, I feel like I should say that when you're doing stuff like this, some of the shots can get pretty complicated with lots and lots of different layers, but nothing that I'm going to show you today is actually hard to do. So probably the most basic situation where you're going to need to do something like this, but you want to try to get away without rotoscoping, is something like this, where your subject is dramatically lighter or darker than your background. And you're like, hey, I don't have to cut this out, I can extract it. And you're right, you can. And if you don't know better, you might be tempted to use the Luma key. Set it to like key out brighter and then just bring up that threshold. And of course, obviously that works, but I can do you one better. If you don't know it already, I recommend familiarizing yourself with the extract effect. You can drop that on, and it does the same thing where you can key out the brighter areas by dragging this square on the top row, and you can also key out darker areas as well if you need to. So you key out that sky, but then you can grab the squares on the lower row down here and pull those out and start to feather your edges. Not really feather the edges, but it makes some pixels semi-transparent instead of just being either, transparent or not. So we can do that, and we can make the sky mostly transparent, but even we don't have to make it all the way transparent. We can leave a little bit of it to help blend our explosion in, because I did promise animals an explosion. So I'll duplicate this and I'll take the extract filter off the bottom one, and I'll drag in an explosion clip and just put that in place, and boom, there is your most basic situation where we avoided roto, but we still put an animal in front of an explosion. Occasionally you'll get really lucky and you'll have a shot like this, where it's just an animal that's a very different color from your background, which is usually going to be green. And just to show you, we could duplicate that and also that top layer and add a key light effect to it, which is After Effects standard built-in keyer, and we'll just key out this green. Definitely make sure that you set the view to be the intermediate result. It defaults to final result, but you want the intermediate result. That way it won't try to remove the spill, which means that it won't contaminate the edges, which is what you want if you're compositing it back onto the same background footage that it was already on. That way it will composite seamlessly instead of looking messed up. And as you can see, that does a pretty good job of removing most of what we need it to. And then when you drop on your Alpha Cleaner effect, that looks like a pretty well cut out cow to me, depending on where you intend to drop your explosion. If we just put it here, then boom, that's in the shot. Sometimes you'll have a shot that looks like you can key it, like this one here. It's just a red chicken on green grass, so that's like a green screen, right? But then you'll drop your key light on and it's a little messier than you expected, but you may be able to mess with the screen gain and the screen balance and come up with a more satisfactory result than you would have thought, especially if you add that Alpha Cleaner effect. And that'll require some adjustments to get rid of all of the outside specks, but overall we did end up with a key that we can technically use, and we end up with an animal that we can drop an explosion behind, which is, what we set out to do. However, sometimes keying isn't going to help you at all, like in this hippopotamus example. It's pretty apparent right away that this, is not really going to work. You can see as I try and adjust the values of it, it's really ugly and chunky looking, and I just think that we can do better than this. But I do recommend always trying to key it, and sometimes you'll surprise yourself with when it will work and when it won't. So we click this button down here, the show channel and color management settings buttons, and we switch through the different color channels. You can see that some of them have a greater separation between the hippo and the water than others. So this blue and this green channel work a lot better than this red channel. Those values are pretty close to each other, whereas these ones are a lot different. So we're going to use that to our advantage this time. So I'm going to duplicate this footage, and I'm going to put a shift channels effect on it, and I'm going to tell it to take the red and the green both from the blue channel. So now this is only showing our blue channel, and then I can put a levels effect on that, and I can move my white point up until the water starts turning white, but you can still see the edge of the hippo, and then I can bring in my black point to darken that edge up as much as I can and get a nice solid shape. All right, that's looking pretty good. So I'll go ahead and add another shift channels to that, and I'll tell it to take the alpha from the luminance this time so that it turns our black sections into transparent, but that's the opposite of what I want. So I'll add an invert effect, and I'll bring that above the second shift channels. So now we have the white part showing instead. I'm gonna go ahead and pre-compose that. I'll call that my matte comp. And then just so I can see what I'm doing, I'll put a fill effect over it. Okay, and that is what I'm working with now. So it's looking pretty good, and I'll go ahead and drop the alpha cleaner effect on it. And that does a pretty good job on its own, getting rid of most of the water garbage and filling in the parts that we need. Now, a major thing we're missing right now is the mouth. So I'll duplicate my base footage again, solo it, and this time, since the mouth is way more pink than everything else, we can probably assume that the red channel is going to be what we need. So I'm going to add a shift channels to that and change all the color channels to red. So now we're only showing the red channel, and I'll add a levels to that as well. And we'll bring that up so most of the mouth turns bright white, and then we'll bring that down to turn our background black. Okay, and because the alpha cleaner effect is so magical, we don't need this to be perfect. We just need to have, as good as we can get it. And then I'll add my second shift channels to turn our luminance into alpha, and then I can hit Control X to cut that layer out of this composition and paste it into my matte composition along with that other layer. And there we go. Now that hippo is nice and filled in, and we mostly just need to worry about these pieces of the water here that are actually touching the hippo, because those aren't being removed by the alpha cleaner effect. So I can go into the matte layer, and I can actually pre-compose both of the other layers I have in here, and then I can duplicate that, and I'll just solo my duplicate, and I'll add a simple choker to it, and I'll turn it up so that I can choke out all this stuff in the water here. Not all of it, I just need the ones that are touching the hippo to be gone. And then I can duplicate this simple choker, but choke it in the reverse direction, so negative, by an equal or greater amount so that it's covering my entire silhouette. And then I can turn that other layer on and change the transfer mode of the one with the simple choker on it to a stencil alpha, and that'll get rid of all that stuff that I don't need. And now in this composition is looking a lot cleaner. So now for the compositing, I'll just duplicate my base footage, and I'll tell it to use the matte as an alpha matte, and I'll go ahead and pre-compose that. I'll call it matted hippo. Okay, I'll turn my background footage back on, and I'll bring in my footage create explosion. I'll put that in the background, just give it a quick color correction. Use a match color and match it to the background. And there we go. It's not very good, but it's not point. Okay, so I'll put that behind the hippo, and as you can see, my outline is still a little bit crispy looking, so we're not quite out of the woods yet. So what I'm gonna do is I'll duplicate my matted hippo, and I'll turn the top one off, and I'll change the bottom one to a darken transfer mode, which means it will make colors below it darker, but not any darker than they would be already. So here where it's compositing with itself over the background, you don't see a change, but here where it's compositing with the explosion, it's only letting the darker colors show through. And then on the layer above it, we'll just add a simple choker to it and choke it in just a couple of pixels, and then I'll add this effect called the matte feather, and I believe I can just leave that on its default. So now that's just bringing in the outline of it a little bit and feathering it out a little bit. And then when I turn all those layers back on, you can see that my outline is looking a lot cleaner than it was before. So that's that compositing trick. One more thing I can do is I can just go into the matted hippo composition and add a real smart motion blur to the matte itself, not to the footage, just to the matte. So I don't want to introduce any new motion blur to the actual footage. I just want the motion blur to be represented in the matte. And there we go. Now my composite is looking pretty clean, and I didn't have to do all that much work, and I didn't have to roto at all. But let's say for the sake of argument that you don't want to composite an explosion in with your wild animals. Well, first of all, I don't agree. But second, there's other things you can do. Like, say you don't want to composite anything, but you just want to reframe or like recompose your shot a little bit. Well, you can, because we have our hippo already matted out and composited in a somewhat realistic way. So I could actually just grab the background and move it, and it still looks like it makes sense. Or I could add an adjustment layer and put a blur on it and maybe add some additional depth of field to the shot. You know, I could mask that out and feather it so it fades into sharpness just like real depth of field would. And that's something you can do. So if you're not interested in explosions, that's all right. Just try to get creative with this and see what you can come up with. Right now I really want to show you guys how to do a difference matte using this moose and these moose babies as an example. But the problem is, to do a difference matte you need a clean plate, and I don't have one. But that's a situation that you're going to run into a lot, because a lot of times the people that are shooting the short films we'll be working on and stuff like that aren't really VFX centric people, and they're not really going to take VFX into account, so they might not get you a clean plate, and you might have to make one. You're not always going to be able to, but in this case we can, because we have the moose and these two mooselings over here on this edge at the beginning, and at the end they're over here on this edge. So I'm going to duplicate this twice, and I'm going to come up to time and freeze frame at the beginning on one of them, and time freeze frame at the end on the other, and that gives me what I need to make a clean plate. I just need to, on the top layer, mask these moose out. So right now I just masked them in, so now I've doubled up on the number of mooses I have, which is too many. If I change that to subtract, now I have an acceptable amount in my opinion. So I'm gonna pre-compose those two layers and call that clean plate. And that's my clean plate. So I'll duplicate my footage and I'll turn off my bottom layer now. I don't need that just now. And I'll change my clean plate to a difference transfer mode. And what that does is it turns everything that is the same to black, and everything that is different to kind of the similar colors to what it already was. You could also use divide instead, which does the same thing but with inverted colors. So I tend to use difference, but just depending on how you want to work, either one of those is going to work for you. So what we want to do now is pre-compose those two layers, and we'll call this moose matte. And you can add a tint effect to it like this to turn it black and white, or if you want to be more advanced, you can flip through these color modes and see which one has the most difference between the background and the foreground. In our case it is red, so instead of adding a tint we'll add a shift channels and shift our channels towards red. Now we can add a levels to it and try to make our moose dudes as bright as possible while making our background as dark as possible. And I'm actually going to add a fast box blur before the levels, and just kind of blur it a little bit, 1 pixel maybe, and that'll get rid of a lot of that white nonsense. It's going to make our outline a little bit less perfect, but I would say that it's a good trade-off. And now we can duplicate our footage one more time, and we can use this moose matte as a luma matte for our moose footage, and there we have the moose-eye kind of cut out. And then we can also pre-compose those and drop on my favorite alpha cleaner And there we go. We've got those guys separated from the background. So we can drop our explosion in. I'll color correct my explosion. I'll do it by hand this time so it'll be a little more precise. So I'll add a levels effect to it. The way I color correct things quickly is to also use the show channel and color management settings. It's a very useful tool. And then on the levels, you can alter the channels one at a time and just do that one at a time until they start looking like they match better. So that red looks good. Green, be about there. Blue looks pretty good as it is. And then when you switch back to RGB, if you made a mistake, it should be really obvious what it was. In my case, looks like I did a pretty good job. So we'll do the same thing where we set the moose layer to a darken transfer mode and then duplicate it so that went to a normal transfer mode, but use the matte feather effect to bring the matte in, make it softer so that our edges look nice and clean. And then for one more final detail, I'll add a new adjustment layer and add a glow effect to it, and I'll turn my threshold way up so it's only affecting these really bright parts of the explosion, and turn my radius way up so that the glow from the explosion bleeds over on top of the animals. So that way it's kind of like a light wrap, because a regular light wrap in this situation would be not appropriate because the edges of the animals already blend perfectly with the background. So a light wrap wouldn't really be useful. So I just use this glow instead to simulate it. So I think to finish out the tutorial, I will just rapid fire through some more examples of varying levels of difficulty really quickly using some of the methods that I just taught you, and maybe some new ones will crop up. I don't know, let's see. So for this first one, it's this bird. My first instinct is to use the extract. So I'll drop that on. And that did not work because it took away a bunch of this bird before it actually started taking away the sky. So let's delete that. Let's key it instead. Keying is just less clean than the extract effect sometimes, but it didn't work. So you gotta do what you gotta do. Let's key out this blue, and that actually looks pretty nice if we turn on the intermediate result instead and maybe play with our different settings like the screen gain and balance. Okay, and I think I'm going to just draw on a garbage mat to get rid of some of that junk in the corner, and I'm not even going to use the alpha cleaner effect on this one. And let's just drop in the explosion, and okay, that one is done. Wait, I just remembered that the extract filter can work on other properties than just the luminance, so I wonder if it might have worked if I had used it on the blue channel instead. No, it would not have worked, but it would have worked better than if I had just used it on the luminance. Maybe let's try these other channels. No, red clearly doesn't work. Okay, no, the way I did it, I guess, is the best way. Good to know. Moving on. This giraffe might be an interesting example. I'll just duplicate it. It looks like we can get rid of that sky pretty easily with the extract. Okay, and that turned out to be true. Now I just have to get rid of these leaves. I wonder if I can do it on the same layer with a key. It looks like I can. I'll set it to the intermediate result so I don't screw up the colors. And I'm losing a little bit of the giraffe, but with the alpha cleaner, it doesn't matter that much. You can stand to lose a little bit of it. Okay, and that seems to have worked a lot better than I expected. So I'll just garbage mat it out, and that one is done. Okay, this one with the sheep on the perfect green grass, it's basically cheating. It's okay, you can tell me, I already know. But a big part of this whole thing is not just matting out the animals, it's making sure that the compositing is on point. And before I was telling you guys that a good trick was to use a darken transfer mode to get the edges to become more transparent, but in this case it's not going to work because this is the only example we've had so far where the subject is way lighter than the background. So if we set this to the darken transfer mode, now it's just showing up the edges and the sheep are disappearing, and that's the opposite of what we want. So we'll use the opposite blend mode, which is called lighten instead. So now we have these ghostly angel sheep, but the edges are clean. So we can duplicate that layer and change that back to a normal transfer mode, and then use the simple choker to get rid of those edges for the most part, and then do a matte feather. to finish the job. And there you go. Now the edges are looking nice and clean. And now for the most dangerous animal of them all, man. Since this one was shot by Chris, he actually knows how to deal with whiny VFX artists like me because he is one himself. So he actually provided a clean plate. So we're going to do the difference matte technique for this example. So I'll duplicate the main footage and just hide it away. And I'll change my guy to a different blend mode. And right off the bat, you can see it's working pretty well. Now we can go ahead and pre-compose these, and we'll add a tint effect to it in a levels and just choke out this background to make it totally black, and then make everything else as bright as possible. Okay, I can add a shift channels to that so I can start taking my alpha from the luminance. So we have this solid white layer here, but with a couple of holes in it. So let's try and fill in those holes a little bit. I'll duplicate the guy again, and I think there's some holes in the jeans here where they overlap with the fence. So I'll try to pull a key on those with my key light effect. If I go to my screen matte, you can see that's actually working pretty well. So I'll just choke out as much of this background as I can, and I'll just draw a quick garbage matte around the jeans. Try not to click on too much stuff as I do. Okay, sorry for that, that was weird. And I'll do an invert effect on it. Okay, and now if I turn my top layer back on, you can see those jeans holes are filled in. And let's just see what we can do. Let me pre-compose these, and I'll do my shift channels effect on it so I can pull the alpha from the luminance once again. And we need to matte out just this middle part with a garbage matte, and then drop on our magic alpha cleaner effect. And it's worked pretty well. I was hoping it would fill in these holes in the skin, but it really didn't. But we can try to get those filled in with a key. So let's drop a key light on there and just key this spot on his forehead here. And it's looking pretty grim right now, but we might be able to make it work. Let's turn on the screen matte, and let's just play with the screen gain a little bit. And that's good, because now our wall is not completely black, but our face and our hands still are. So then we can mess maybe with the clip black and the clip white. If we bring the clip white way down, we're not getting this wall, but we're still getting the face, which is cool. And then we can just mask around that face and hands. Let's invert it. And now I'm just gonna Control X to cut that and go into my pre-comp with all my other keys and just paste it in and give it a screen transfer mode so it will blend in with the other layers. And that fills in our holes some of the way, and hopefully we will find that the alpha cleaner effect has finished the job, which it looks like it has. So we can just duplicate the guy again and use that as a track matte. Now we have our fellow matted out. We can pre-compose that, flatten it up, bring in our explosion. I really like this. And we already know how to do this, so let's set it to a darken transfer mode to get rid of those edges. His head has completely disappeared, has been replaced with an explosion. That's okay. Duplicate it again, change it back to a normal transfer mode, use a matte feather, fix those edges up a little bit, and there we go. And that's really it. There's not like a flashy effect to end this one on. It's just, you know, trying hard not to rotoscope. I hope you found this helpful. Don't really have much else to say. I guess I could beg you to leave a comment or click the like button or subscribe, but you guys already know that, so I guess I'll just leave. Bye.